The hammer descends, the B-52 era in Iran. Iran had already been decimated by America's stealth bombers and fifth-generation air superiority fighters, which dismantled the backbone of its defensive network. Now we are witnessing the rise of the B-52 Stratofortress. Tehran has just begun to truly dread this 74-year-old American warbird, as it has launched a historically overwhelming offensive against the nation. The Iranian leadership already recognizes that the war is effectively lost while these B-52s obliterate every target in their path. This move by the United States is a stroke of genius. It signals a long-term strategy to permanently dismantle the Iranian regime for good. If you want to dive deeper into this brilliant strategic play, stay with us. The deployment of the B-52s is the most critical and recent development in the ongoing Iran conflict. This big, ugly, fat fellow is now dominating the theater, proving that Tehran's air defenses are so compromised they are powerless to stop the U.S. from using its oldest, non-stealth bombers to inflict even more severe damage. From surgical precision to raw brute force, think of it this way. The B-2s forced the doors open with the assistance of American and Israeli fighter wings. Now the B-52s have arrived to pound Iran's remaining military infrastructure into total ruin. We are witnessing a clear transition from surgical efficiency to pure brute force. It might seem startling after the U.S. and Israel conducted 1,000 strikes on Iranian defenses in the initial 24 hours of the new conflict. However, those opening hits were precision-based. They were preceded by advanced cyber operations, including radar jamming and the spoofing of Iranian radar systems. Once all communications were severed, the United States and Israel initiated the first wave of attacks. Air defenses, naval assets, and airfields were neutralized. Decapitation strikes targeted high-ranking leaders, including the now-deceased Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei. Those first 24 hours were a firestorm more precise than Iran ever anticipated, but what Tehran never expected was that the U.S. was merely clearing the way for something much larger to arrive. With the surgery finished, the U.S. is now delivering sledgehammer blows to the open wounds, and Iran can do nothing about it. The B-52s have arrived, and in a moment we will detail exactly what they are doing in Iran. But first, let's take a quick look at the sheer power these newcomers bring to the theater of operations. The power of the Stratofortress. The B-52 differs significantly from the B-2, which has already flown missions over 30 hours long against Iran, because the B-52 is not a stealth platform. It doesn't sneak past enemy radars and air defenses like its younger, more expensive cousin. But what the B-52 does exceptionally well is helping a nation that has already secured total air superiority to completely annihilate targets on the ground. The bomber can carry roughly 32,000 kilos of ordnance, utilizing this massive capacity to transport American precision-guided munitions capable of destroying any remaining Iranian defenses and military hubs. Analyst Max Afterburner explains more in his breakdown regarding the arrival of the B-52s. He notes, "This is a heavyweight. I mean, the B-52 can carry up to 70 JDAMs. That number alone tells you everything you need to know about the staggering firepower the B-52 brings to the battlefield. These surface-guided weapons come in three versions: 500 lbs, 1,000 lbs, and 2,000 lbs. With 70 JDAMs available, we assume Afterburner believes the B-52s sent to Iran would likely be equipped with the 1,000-pound version. Strategic reach and standoff capabilities. Even with air superiority, isolated surface-to-air missile systems could still be activated to attack a B-52. As Afterburner reveals, this might be a concern. Iran's air defenses were shattered, but not totally eliminated. The possibility of these isolated threats likely means U.S. B-52s are carrying JASSMs, or Joint Air-to-Surface Standoff Missiles. These subsonic missiles, with ranges between 370 and 925 kilometers depending on the variant, allow American B-52s to strike targets from a great distance, keeping the bombers safely out of reach of the few remaining Iranian air defenses. This brings us back to what the B-52s are currently achieving in Iran. The stealthy B-2s cleared the path with precision strikes, allowing the B-52s to operate with much greater safety. Now that the B-52s have arrived, they are destroying everything that Iran has left. Afterburner, when commenting on the targets of American B-52s, notes that Iranian launches become isolated when they lose a command node. Resupply becomes incredibly slow because production facilities are also being hit. Now their time to withdraw is practically non-existent. In other words, the B-52s will destroy the very points that allow Iran to use its primary ace in the hole against the U.S., its ballistic missiles. The numbers of destruction. The War Zone, TWZ, agrees with Afterburner that American B-52s are systematically destroying Iran's command and control nodes. It features comments from Air Force General Dan Kane, who states that Iran's leadership structures are in dire straits. Part of the reason is a shift from precision to sheer massed force. On the fourth day, the campaign is moving from large, deliberate long-range strikes to massed precision force over Iran. Perhaps it is more accurate to say that precision combined with force is the new phase of the conflict. Iran is already feeling the immense impact of the B-52's arrival, evidenced by the staggering number of strikes. After the initial 24 hours and the first 1,000 strikes, the United States and Israel doubled the offensive. In the first 72 hours of the conflict, the two allies joined forces to destroy 2,000 targets within Iran. The B-52s played a fundamental role in this escalation by firing long-range munitions against targets that were no longer adequately protected by an Iranian air defense network that was far weaker than it should have been from the start. PBS News reports that the Iranian Ministry of Health claims 920 people were killed by March 4th, though it remains unclear if these are civilians or military personnel. According to the Jerusalem Post, more than 1,000 members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps died in the first wave of attacks alone. Therefore, it is safe to assume this number has surged following the actions of the US B-52s. This is an absolutely destructive force, neutralizing the ballistic threat. Perhaps the greatest impact of these American bombers has been on the defensive lines. We mentioned earlier that US B-52s seem to be focusing on Iran's command and control nodes. In a ground war, these nodes would be essential for coordinating troops and logistics, but this is not a land war. As we've stated, Iran's primary advantage is its massive arsenal of ballistic missiles. Iran Watch says that CENTCOM, the U.S. Central Command, estimated this stockpile at over 3,000 missiles in 2022. Iran likely used a large portion of this arsenal in attacks on Israel and U.S. bases before and during the current conflict. At the beginning of the war, Israeli Defense Forces estimated Iran possessed about 2,500 missiles. Even so, it is a high number. Thanks to the American B-52s, Iran cannot fully exploit these stockpiles. Destroying the command and control centers prevents Iran from coordinating mission launches. By combining this with strikes on Iranian missile launch sites, you neutralize the only real power the country can project. The numbers prove this. On March 4th, CNN reported more comments from General Kane, showing that Iran's ballistic missiles are being gradually eliminated. As of this morning, U.S. Central Command continues to push forward. Ballistic missile launches from the Iranian theater have plummeted by 86% since the fighting began. Kane stated there was a 23% drop in just the last 24 hours, and as a bonus, 73% of Iran's kamikaze drones were shot down. We are witnessing the gradual collapse of Iran's military strategy, with the B-52s playing a pivotal role, the financial masterstroke. But remember, we said earlier in the video that sending the B-52 was a stroke of genius by the United States. The destruction of Iran's operational capacity isn't the primary reason, though it helps. There is another factor. Before we dive deeper into that, if this is the type of analysis you want to see more of, make sure to be subscribed to Global Alert 24/7. We analyze everything like this every single week. So what makes the arrival of the B-52 such a brilliant move by the U.S.? President Donald Trump gave us a hint on March 2nd when he indicated that a war with Iran could extend much longer than some might anticipate. While some predicted 4 to 5 weeks for the conflict, Trump stated that the American military could go beyond that time frame. This means the U.S. is already preparing for a multi-week conflict, even while still in the first week. Furthermore, the U.S. must prepare for the possibility that the war drags on even longer, which means one very important thing. The United States must keep costs low while attacking Iran with the maximum possible firepower. This is where the genius of using B-52s instead of continuing with the newer, stealthier B-2s comes into play. While it is tempting to see the U.S. military as a giant with unlimited resources, the country still seeks to avoid unnecessary spending. One way the U.S. could burn through money in a prolonged conflict is by continuing to use B-2s for every mission. A summary from 1945 explains well why the B-52s entered the scene. It states that because it can carry huge volumes of precision munitions, the B-52 has massive flight endurance and costs significantly less per flight hour than the B-2. The B-52 is ideal for prolonged bombing in permissive airspace. Permissive perfectly describes Iran's airspace right now. Regarding costs, Avion explains that the B-2 costs roughly double the B-52 just to get into the air. The stealth investments and intense maintenance of the B-2 make it ideal for the initial surgical strikes, after which it withdraws to make room for other bombers. There is also a critical factor of direct cost to consider. A single B-2 costs the U.S. about $2 billion to build. If one were shot down or suffered a malfunction over Iran, it would create a massive hole in any budget the U.S. has for its war. Compare that to the B-52. The U.S. has upgraded the B-52 fleet, investing $15 billion through 2021 as part of a $48.6 billion program to keep these planes flying until 2060. Currently, the U.S. has 76 B-52s in service. Even with upgrades, each unit costs about $640 million, not counting the original construction cost decades ago. Here, the risk is much lower. Losing a B-52 is expensive, but far less so than losing a B-2. Then there are the operating costs. According to the national interest, a B-2 costs about $200,000 per flight hour. The B-2 sent to Iran in the surgical phase spent over 30 hours in the air, costing more than $6 million per mission. The B-52, meanwhile, costs about $70,000 per flight hour. Even adjusting for inflation, that is nearly half the cost of the B-2. From a financial standpoint, switching to the B-52 is a masterstroke. The U.S. is dumping massive amounts of firepower on Iran using advanced weaponry, but doing so with a bomber that places a significantly smaller financial burden on the American defense budget. If the Trump administration anticipates a campaign of 4 to 6 weeks, this switch was vital to ensure it can be sustained. The geopolitical fallout. All of this brings us to the situation as it stands now. Iran is not in a good position. We've already discussed the ballistic missiles and air defenses, but it's worth going a bit deeper on that last point. Afterburner states that Iran's integrated air defense system was far less advanced than Western systems, even before the bombing. As we've seen, surface missiles and Russian-Chinese radars were totally destroyed by B-52s and other assets. Iran had lost the air defense battle before the war even began. Army technology details that Iran's defenses aren't necessarily the high-end Chinese and Russian units. Some might think Iran has a few of those, but its air defense is mostly made of cheaper copies of the Russian S-300 and Chinese HQ-7, manufactured by Iran themselves and never before tested in combat. Following the test of war, these copies have been a disappointment. Furthermore, reverse engineering without innovation means the systems Iran built for itself carry the same weaknesses as the ones they were based on. Iranian copies of the S-300 are vulnerable to Israeli weapons, like the Icebreaker missile, designed to exploit electronic warfare flaws in those radars. Iran failed to fix the vulnerabilities when copying these systems, and now they are suffering the consequences. Currently, Iran is in a situation where its weak air defense network is even worse than before. Newsweek states the country likely moved defenses from the east to the west to avoid more strikes from that direction. But this isn't a show of strength. It just means the east of Iran is now territory that US B-52s can use to launch munitions from the side of the country that Iran left unprotected. Tehran and Isfahan are slightly more protected after the first wave, but it remains insufficient to stop US and Israeli actions. As Afterburner said, Iran is likely relying on luck for an occasional hit due to American complacency. That isn't an air defense strategy, it's a long-shot gamble. The United States has total air superiority. This doesn't necessarily mean air supremacy, which is operating with zero contest, but it is close enough to send non-stealth bombers into Iran. This shows an American confidence that Iran did not want to see, indicating that Trump is not bluffing when he says the campaign will last weeks. Many more strikes are coming from the B-52 fleet. And that's without mentioning the carrier strike groups operating in the Persian Gulf, along with the fighter jets and support aircraft they bring to the fight. Future perspectives. As for what happens next, the scope of the war is expanding. In Iran, Afterburner states the arrival of the B-52 signals a clear shift toward higher volume and persistence. The U.S. scope is broadening regarding strike locations and future plans. On March 4th, the U.S. targeted the Iris Dana in international waters near Sri Lanka. This is far from the Persian Gulf and indicates the U.S. is expanding its strikes to hit Iranian military assets outside the country. There is also the possibility of the U.S. sending ground troops. According to Chatham House, this would be necessary if the U.S. truly wants to remove the Iranian regime. Trump's plan to help the Iranian people rise up and topple the theocracy seems more like hope than strategy right now. There are still no signs of effective internal opposition or regime defections, the study center states. This suggests the Iranian people aren't yet invested enough in their ability to topple the revolutionary guard. This leads us to an interesting perspective. Perhaps the arrival of the B-52s and weeks of sustained strikes are just preparing the ground for a third phase of the war. First came the surgery, then the hammer. What could come next is the defeat of the Iranian regime by American soldiers advancing on the ground. What we know for sure is that the Iranian regime has been profoundly shaken and may never fully recover, which is bad news for the leadership. It is also terrible news for Putin, who was betting on strengthening ties between Russia and Iran to establish himself as a global geopolitical player. If the Iranian regime falls, Putin will be severely hampered. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe to Global Alert to follow our coverage of Operation Epic Fury. Thank you for watching.